What's up, everyone? This is Aiden K, and welcome to another episode of the Digging Deeper podcast. Today I'm joined by a very special guest, Mr. Spiro Damaskinos. He is the A&R Director at Sony Music Africa, and he is also better known as DJ Spiro.
Hi,
so thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, man.
Cool.
Good to be here.
So what this conversation is really going to be about is a two-part conversation. One part will be covering his DJ career, which has, how long has that been going on for?
Jeez, it's probably about 30 plus years. Showing my age.
Longer than I've been alive, anyway. And the second part will cover his job as the A&R Director of Sony and how he got into a role like that and what advice he has for producers, artists, DJs about how they can get into the music industry and what an actual A&R is, because that term gets thrown around a lot, but not a lot of people actually know what it means and what their responsibility actually is. So before this interview, I sent him a couple of questions, including where he grew up, which I found really interesting. Was you were born in Athens and then went to Zimbabwe. Mm-hmm. How did that happen? How did that come about?
So born in Athens, and then my parents got a job opportunity, and I don't know, I was 7, 8 years old. Next thing we were in Africa. So
could you speak English?
Not a word. So I actually didn't speak English, clearly not very well. When I landed in Zim, I went to a Greek school, and that's kind of where I actually didn't speak English, and stayed there until I was, I understand, 5, whatever the grade that is now, and then from there kind of moved to SA, where I kind of did high school here. So pretty much been here since then, really.
So did the music in those countries influence you growing up? Were you into music? Was it something that you were interested in, or did it develop later in your life?
Yeah, so I suppose my influence was actually my late father. So growing up in Greece, my dad had the biggest jazz collection in the whole of Greece. So I grew up. My earliest memories growing up in Athens, I was in the house we stayed in. My dad had a wall of just equipment, of like reel-to-reel turntables and just vinyls. So my early influence was really jazz. So I grew up on Ella Fitzgerald, Oscar Peterson's, like the real proper jazz stuff, and that was really, I suppose, the core of my musical influence. So I wasn't really influenced by Greek music, because actually we were an anomaly, in Greece. My dad hated Greek music, right? So it was literally, we wouldn't hear a Greek record. It was all about jazz. So I suppose I was fortunate, looking back now, that was my early influences growing up on this kind of, on jazz, and it was real quality jazz. It wasn't just kind of, it was the whole spectrum of it. So that was really my musical base was my father. And, kind of learning through him and just, being around him, and every day there's music playing in the house, and it was jazz. So that was really, I suppose, my core influence, if I think back on my roots.
And when did you decide to get into DJing?
So, growing up in that environment, I was always into music. And then, as I was getting older, getting into high school or getting into school, I started kind of developing my own music kind of, tastes, going to clubs, and started listening to music. I started kind of getting into that space. And then I suppose really was when I was young, I started buying records in SA, and I started collecting music, and I started playing parties for friends, and that was kind of, I suppose, when I started developing my desire to DJ.
Yeah. Did you play any instruments? Were you into music before? Obviously, you were listening to it, and you had quite an intense education in different styles of music. But was there any motivation to learn how to play an instrument, or was it just DJ?
Yeah, I suppose if I look back, regrettably, no, I didn't have any inclination to play instruments. It was really about at that stage I didn't realize, as you growing up, you didn't realize it was going to be DJing, but it was just about music and then actually playing it out. So no inclination around playing instruments. My parents tried to kind of get me, and I played a bit of piano, so a bit of keys. I can do some basic keys, but that was about the extent of my actual musical instrumental knowledge. Yeah.
And how did you get into learning how to DJ?
Again, I suppose being in that environment with my father, he had a lot of equipment. In those days, obviously, we didn't have pitch control decks and etc. So I kind of, as I started developing my passion for music, I started collecting records and I started practicing at home. So the equipment that was there, we had a turntable, 3 tape decks, and I started buying records from, in those days, just mullahs in town, etc. And I started practicing myself, with the equipment that I had, which pretty much mixing from turntable to cassette, recording another cassette, and then using the other cassette player to cue the next track.
What music were you buying at that time?
It was, I suppose in those days it was Italo disco. And it was like the early Chicago house days, so very much kind of Funkmaster Flex. It was in those days. And I used to stay up until, on a weeknight, on a school night, I'd stay up until like 5 in the morning. My mother would wake me up, and I would still be in front of the equipment, making myself cassettes and making myself mixtapes, like an hour or 90-minute mixtapes. And then I'd go to school, and I just couldn't wait to get home to have a listen to my mix and to see, how it came out, and kind of takeaways of what I could do better, etc. So that's really how I suppose I was self-taught around DJing, or the principle of DJing anyway, with the equipment that I had on hand.
And how were you discovering music that you were into at that time? Were you going to record stores and just listening to music, or was there people around you that were also listening to that kind of music, giving you suggestions or their taste in music?
In those days, it was very much clubs. So I'd be clubbing a lot. In those days, it was the Hillbrow days, so a lot of clubs in Hillbrow. So I'd do a lot of clubbing, and then record stores. So it was.
How old were you at this time?
Jesus, I was about, I don't know, must have been about 15, 16, somewhere around there. I had to sneak into the club. I was underage. So it was through that, so through going to the clubs and going to record stores. I mean, in terms of my social group, I was like the guys would come to me, for the latest music. Yeah, please give me a mixtape. I want the new stuff. So that was my thing. Oh.
And then obviously you were self-taught in the principles of DJing, but how did you then learn the actual steps? Or was it just by ear going, okay, now these songs are beat matched or they're in the same tempo? How did you learn those fundamentals of DJing? Was it just through trial and error?
Very much so. For me, it was that. So I never really got a proper someone kind of teaching me. So it was really about kind of just doing it. And like I said, I spent a lot of time on it. I mean, I spent endless amounts of nights and I loved it. And that was it, because I was passionate about it. I just loved it. So that's how I really learned around kind of sequencing and kind of what worked and how to beat mix. And then obviously it extended as I carried on in my life. Then obviously it became more. I had more experience, and then I suppose fine-tuned it.
Who were some of your idols in getting into DJing? Were there people that you were looking towards for motivation, or was there anybody? Were you exposed to any DJs at that period?
Yeah, growing up, I mean, in those days, there were some local DJs that were pretty good. But my real kind of aspirations came in when I went to the UK. Those were really kind of where I really started getting kind of aspirational DJs. For me, I suppose my stalwarts had to be Sasha and Digweed. They were just, it was another level for me, and experience having the experience watching them play, and kind of the music they were playing and kind of how they were mixing. It was just they were probably, I would probably say, my biggest inspiration around kind of in there at that time.
Yeah. You said that you were making mixtapes at home and playing for friends. When did you get into playing gigs? And were you always DJ Spiro, or did you have another alias that you played under in the early days?
Doing parties for doing parties for mates. So having a party, I'd take all my dad's equipment and go and do their parties. Those in the school days, and then when I finished school, I moved to London. And I stayed there for 2 years, and that's when I suppose I had my biggest musical kind of revelation, right? Around, when I left here, I knew everything. I was like the guy. I was the go-to guy around, from a musical perspective. But then I got to the UK, I realized, wow, I was at the hub of the musical kind of center of in Europe, and realizing how much I didn't know. and then rediscovering everything from hip hop to rock to dance, and it was really there that I started kind of buying a lot of records, going to different gigs, different experiences. And then from there, from buying records, I started doing a few gigs there. So there I was actually now properly DJing with proper DJ equipment. Again, nothing major, it was more like kind of warm-up sets. I played like the Gardening Club in Covent Garden and a few others. And, that's how I suppose started getting a proper experience around, proper gigs. Buying a lot of records there. So that was really kind of where I started doing some proper DJing, so to speak. And then I got back here with a lot of records. I remember coming back here, it was about 92, and realizing that they were still playing a lot of, like, I don't know, cheesy, the kind of the whole kind of rave scene hadn't really kicked in here yet. And I was like, wow, where is everything? Where's everyone? And then from there I started kind of hustling and getting gigs in clubs around Joburg. And that's where I was supposed to start playing properly, right? That was about kind of 92. I was really kind of got into playing gigs properly. In terms of DJ, I suppose with a name like Spiro, it didn't make sense to be like DJ John, right? So just kind of Spiro, and then the DJ thing. In those days, you would DJ someone,
your
right?
name, but most of the time.
So that's kind of, I suppose, stuck. So when I meet people who say, "Are you DJ Spiro?" I'm like, "Yeah, Spiro, DJ."
And where were you playing when you came back? What were some of the parties? And obviously, it was before my time in the music industry, and I mean, in '92, I wasn't born yet. So where were some of the places you were playing? And from what I've heard, anyway, the Trance Raves that came about in the early mid '90s, late '90s, were something to sort of experience, or something to really witness. So how did that, from the clubbing scene being very cheesy, develop into the rave culture that was so, I would say, so influential in the dance scene now, anyway, in this country?
Yeah, so like I said, living in London, like I said, was my biggest kind of, those 2 years that I spent there was like my biggest kind of education, like I said, my revelation from a musical perspective. And I really found my niche around progressive music, listening to Session Digweed. I mean, losing my mind, and David Morales on the main floor, Ministry of Sound, Tony Humphries, you name it. I pretty much had a 2-year real
crash course.
Induction, right? A real immersive trip into the music scene. And coming back here, like I said, the first gigs, like I said, they were still, the kind of scene hadn't really hit South Africa at the time. And then I was doing kind of, like I said, just kind of up and coming clubs. Some of them worked, some of them didn't, right? Because obviously the music that I was playing was quite relatively progressive. And then as time went on, it was around about the time I came, about 92, 93, Fourth World opened, which was a big kind of underground club where I found the music that they were playing in Europe. I was like, wow, finally a club that's playing kind of the European sound. So the sound started to come through into the country. And then really, I suppose it was about the mid-90s. It really hit. I mean, in those days, ecstasy, had just started hitting the shores in terms of as a recreational kind of drug. I mean, those days it wasn't even classified in the country. So it was, guys were taking it, and there was no, the cops weren't even aware of what it was because it just hadn't hit as such. And then as the scene started coming in, the music started coming in, and the parties started getting bigger and bigger. From, like I said, from the days of Fourth World, the whole scene finally hit SA. We were a few years off what is happening in Europe. But it was amazing. It was, in those days, it was a revelation because of the music and the whole kind of scene that went with it. I mean, the parties were amazing. In the early days, they used to drive out to, they used to be out on farms. So it was a whole thing. You have to go and drive out to Muldersdrift or where it was, and there was this kind of, there was 10,000 people. Were
they big productions, or was it just like a sound rig? And
it was, at the beginning it was pretty much sound rig, but then it started developing, right? Obviously the production started getting bigger. But they were, big sound systems, which was, I think, always the big thing. The systems were massive. So whether it was the Ice Rave or there's so many, but the rigs were really big. Most of the guys, obviously, they were putting on parties that had big sound system, which was, again, that's the big draw card. It was a time of discovery, I think, when the scene finally hit and people were like saying, wow, what is this? It was good parties, crazy parties.
What was one of your most memorable raves back in that period that was here anyway?
Jeez, few. I mean, the ice raves were always massive.
Where were those?
They did quite a few in town. They did quite a few outside of, so in the outside areas. They were mixed between progressive and psy trance, but they were big. Mother raves were also good. There were quite a few of those. I remember the mother raves. It obviously was when kind of the word rave had come in, and it's starting to kind of hit the headlines on what are these parties. And I think it was Beckett. It was Beckett's Trek, and he came and did like a feature on it. And he went to the mother rave, and it was the one they did at Nazareth. And he was there the whole night with his camera crew, interviewing people, whatever. And at the end, he said, I don't know what the controversy is about these rave things, but I've been here all night, and it's just feel good. Everyone's just feeling good. Everyone's happy. Everyone's dancing. There's a lot of energy. I see no violence. And this is really cool. And ironically, behind him there were just a whole bunch. They were just smashed. Everyone was on. Like, people gurning, eyes are going, and like the guys behind, and all the guys are behind him doing this. It was classic. The mother raves. I suppose one of my personal experiences. Boy George, when he came out, the first time he came out, it was a big thing, and he was on carte blanche, and he was doing this big rave party as a DJ. Also talking about the whole rave scene. And he did a gig, and his gig was in Germiston, massive warehouse, and I was playing before him. And
how long had you been DJing professionally at that time?
Oh Jesus, this is and you asked me years, but it must have been probably about 4 or 5 years.
The biggest gig that you'd had, or was it?
At that time, it was probably one of the biggest that I'd done. Yeah. So I got there, and I was playing, and I started playing, and it was a massive warehouse, like one of these industrial sized warehouses, and a lot of people were outside. So I'm playing, and it was a vibe, but it was like there was still a lot of people outside. And then it started raining, like pissing down, and then just everyone came inside. So I'm like, wow, okay, now we're cooking, right? And then halfway through my set, power outage, boom, just down, right? And people would just go, it's pissing outside, so everyone's inside. Obviously, everyone's like in a party vibe, everyone's done whatever they've done, so everyone's ready to go. And power went out, and I just remember sitting by the decks waiting, and then all of a sudden, just saw the turntables lit up, like boof, there was lights. So I went, and I just like, are you ready? And the whole way out just went crazy, like yeah, and had the most amazing set. It was one of my most memorable moments, and also the setup was amazing. I mean, I was sitting literally in a wall of sound, like 2 stories high, of just speakers either side. So it was obviously, because it was a big warehouse, so they had a big sound system. So that was a really amazing party. So many. Other one was when Faithless first came out. They did Electric Workshop. It was a Camel experience. And I was playing at the time, I was playing at the same time that they were coming on. I think it was midnight. They were coming on at midnight. And there was a big countdown clock, and I was on an outside floor. And I was playing, I think, just before they came on. So I was playing at the dance floor. It was really cool. It was pumping. And then the countdown clock came, and boom, it went to 0. And literally my tent just kind of emptied out. Everyone went to go see Faithless. They were inside on the main floor. But what people didn't realize is Faithless at the time, their tour was an unplugged tour. So it was, God is a DJ, or We Come One, and not We Come One. It was Faith. It was Insomnia, right? It was an Insomnia album, and but their whole set was unplugged. It was like a live unplugged thing. So you had this like thousands of people that were just there to get ready to get on, right? And there's Faith is doing an unplugged set, right? so I thought, okay, well, that's the end of my night. And within 15 minutes, 20 minutes of Faithless starting, next thing my tent was brimming, and people were so much people bumping the turntables. We had to get security to just kind of hold people back because they were so busy. It was crazy. It was one of the many memorable sets that I've had back in those days.
You obviously saw the transition from the rave scene to the club scene, sort of about 10, 15 years ago. How did that influence your music taste? Were you still playing the sort of festival, uplifting music that you were playing in the rave days?
Yeah, I mean, the transition really happened, so obviously, again, it was a new thing. So obviously, with the big parties, it was the raves. So everyone coming in these big raves, 10, 20, 30,000 people. And then that started becoming kind of filtering out into the club. So you started getting more of these kind of underground clubs. And I mean, there were clubs I used to play at a club like Hideout, which was very kind of, so it wasn't trance, it was more progressive and kind of more techno, tech house, progressive vibe. So you weren't playing kind of the big trance stuff. So the trance stuff was really more for the big festivals, and in the clubs it was definitely more house, more techno, more the cutting edge stuff. So you saw the transition. So with the big festivals coming, you started getting an emergence of a lot more of these underground clubs, and the sound was definitely different. I mean, obviously depending on the club, some were trance clubs, but generally it was a little bit different and a little bit more, but more into the housey side or the underground house side in the clubs.
But at that time, when did you get into production as well? Because I know you produced under an alias as well. When did you decide to get into production? Was it something that you wanted to do to further your career, or was it just something that you were passionate about?
It was a passion thing for me, really, and it really came about when I joined the record label. I joined BMG Records. I kind of started looking into that. I always wanted to do it. I just never had the opportunity. I was just really more DJing at the time, doing gigs. So it happened to me post me getting into a record label where I actually started exploring that.
And what made you do it under an alias and not under DJ Spiro?
Spiro.
And what was the alias?
So I had partnered up with a guy called Eric, and we just kind of, obviously it wouldn't make sense to go Spiro and Eric, right? So we just came up with an alias. It was, it's a big thing. Obviously, guys run in those days specifically. A lot of guys ran under aliases, and so our alias was Heat Seeker, as in like a heat-seeking missile. So that was the alias that we produced under, and it was really about just doing music that at the time I was playing or I was passionate about. It wasn't really about, it was just really about doing club music.
And when did you release the track Explicit?
Explicit was, it must have been about 90, it's supposed to be about the late 90s. I got to say 98, I think. I can't be exact, but it was about 90, was 98 around there.
Is it the same track that's the intro to Blade? Or was that just a sound that happened to sound similar to?
No, it was an actual sample. It wasn't the song that was used in the movie.
Yeah,
it was actually a sample.
Was it a sample that was recorded, or did you find it? Because I think it didn't come from a hardware. It didn't come from a 303.
So the story behind the track is an interesting one. So at the time I was DJing. I was working at BMG at the time, and I was doing productions. I was doing other productions with Eric. We were doing other stuff, remixes, etc. And I was playing at a club called Ortega's on 14th Avenue. It was a small little bar on a Thursday night I used to cook. And I remember walking in, Blade, the movie had come out at the time, and I hadn't seen it. So I remember walking in, and Sasha Martinanga was playing before me, because we had guest DJs, whatever, on the night. And I walked in, and he played this track, right? He played the original, the Confusion, right? The new Audio Confusion off the soundtrack. So he played this, and the crowd went mad. And I was like, fuck, what is this? I love the loop, but the production wasn't great. It just didn't have the right drive, the right kick. I was like, I love the loop, but it's pity about the rest of the production. So anyway, so I went and I said, what the hell are you playing? So he showed me. I was like, okay, cool. I remember I phoned Eric on the time. I said, listen, just go online and find this loop. We're going to find the sample. We're going to do a club version of this track. And he phoned me, I think it was the next day. He said, I found it. So I said, I'm coming. So we went to the studio, and we sat there literally within, I think the song took us, maybe 3 hours. We just sat there. I already had the vision of kind of how I wanted it to sound.
So was he the more technical producer? You were the more executive.
Yeah, pretty much.
Decision maker.
I was the branch trust. He obviously weighed in as well, but he was the executor, so to speak.
Yeah.
And within 3 hours we had the track. I was like, wow. And I took it out and I started playing it out. And just the reaction I was getting was just unbelievable. Everywhere I played, they were like, what is this? And then obviously with playing around the club, you got some feedback. So went back to studio, fine-tuned it a little bit around the builds and the breaks and etc. And then eventually we released it officially, and it went on to be like, I think it was a number 1 on 5FM. It was voted the dance song of the year. We got it signed to labels internationally, to appear on some comps. So it was a massive one. Then post that, I think there was a whole lot of other cover versions that came out. I think the Warp Brothers did a version, Aquagen did a couple of others that kind of took that. But ours was the first original kind of, suppose, club or dance or trance remix of that, using that sample. And we got the sample cleared, actually. Funny enough, we sent it through to the original publishers. Yeah, we didn't do it. And actually they came back and they gave us, I think, that publishing split on it. So it was an officially cleared sample. It was pretty good.
And did you try and follow that up with anything else? Were you still looking to produce more at that time?
Yeah, we produced quite a bit. I produced quite a few songs under that moniker, and it was, I mean, nothing obviously as big as Explicit. I mean, that was the one. We got some love, but nothing as big. But it was cool. I mean, the stuff we were doing was stuff that I was enjoying and playing out.
Yeah.
We got on a couple of compilations and stuff like that.
And you mentioned that you started working for BMG in the label side of things. How did that come about? And was it something that you were looking to get into? Or was it just by an opportunity that you then started working for a label?
It was... I hadn't kind of, I suppose at the time, I was kind of looking for something different. But it just kind of was an opportunity that happened at the time. Obviously, like I said, I was DJing, I was headlining most of the big parties, etc. So from my DJing career was kind of flourishing, and I was also a resident at Sports Cafe, which was like a commercial kind of club out in Village Walk, with like a bar, restaurant vibe, and it was about 95. And then a colleague of mine, mate I had, Paul, he was at BMG Records. He was about to leave, and they realized that, for the label, they realized with what was happening at the time was about the mid-90s, that kind of dance and urban music were starting to kind of take off as genres. So they realized they needed kind of expertise in the field. So they were looking to hire two heads, one to head up the urban division and one to head up the dance division.
Did you have another job at that time, or were you?
Yeah, I was resident.
DJ?
I was a resident.
Okay.
I was just DJing. So I was a resident at sports, and then obviously doing a lot of other club gigs and raves, etc. And they approached me and said, "Listen, we need someone. Would you be interested?" And I'm like, to be a dance A&R. So I was hired in to be a dance A&R to actually start their dance division. And I was like, hell yeah, I'm in. And I started, and that's kind of how the opportunity came. And I joined BMG Records. I think it was 96. Yeah.
And you headed up, obviously, the dance A&R side of things. But for people who don't know what an A&R actually is, what were some of the functions that you were fulfilling in this label as an A&R? What was your responsibility?
So to start up a dance label, around everything from signing dance singles locally to compilations to getting stuff on radio, but all dance. That was kind of the main role. So starting a dance division, sampling DJs. So literally starting a whole dance label. And obviously being BMG at the time, they had a lot of sub-labels. They were signed like Twisted Records, MCA. There was a lot of deconstruction records. They had a lot of international labels, dance labels, tied up to the label. And my job was really to kind of bring it all in and, start spreading it out, getting into clubs, getting into radio, and then obviously doing releases as well.
So you could say that your function was partly to build the dance industry in this country anyway.
Well, yeah, it was something that happened kind of as a consequence, 100%. But I mean, it was really obviously for the label at the time. I remember I used to sample everyone from. I used to get into vinyls in those days. You ship your vinyls in, and it was kind of pre-internet days. And guys would come in, and I'd be sampling one from Fresh to Clio, and Mosquito would come in. And those times the guys had gigs at radio, and they'd come in, and I'd sample them with brand new records. And it was, I suppose, yes, it was very much around spreading the love around, getting the dance music out to the market through radio DJs, club DJs, etc.
How were you going about looking for records to sign? Were you signing records at that time, or were you mainly promoting records that were coming in through the sub labels that you mentioned?
So I was signing some. We were signing some local records. It wasn't that much in those days in terms of local productions. A few guys doing some stuff. So there was a bit, but generally it was more international and really about kind of feeding it into the market. So we'd pick and choose stuff that's coming out of the labels and then see what would be relevant for the market and then push it accordingly. And then obviously through that doing compilations, getting singles to radio and so on.
It was something that Vimo touched on in the interview that I did with him about how important compilations were to DJs at that time and how it was a platform for them to grow their brands. What were some of the compilations that you were involved in those days, and how were you going about sourcing music for that?
So some of the compilations, I mean, there's quite a few. I suppose some of the main ones is I started the House Anthems brand locally. We did I think 3 or 4. Other compilations did a Serious Beats. Probably my most popular, in terms of one of the big ones in the market was Trance House. It was the time when the trance sound was starting to get big, and it was, I suppose, it was about feeding that market, and there was nothing out in the market that was really kind of feeding that style. So
there's obviously a demand for it in what was happening at the raves and at the clubs, and you were sort of fulfilling that need that was being dictated to you by that scene with those compilations.
Yeah, very much so. Like I said, like the house anthems, it was about taking it there and also finding the music that fitted. And I think probably Trance House is probably the one that's probably attached the most is kind of one of the most infamous ones, because it was so niche around kind of bringing in the house and the trance sound onto one compilation.
Who were some of the DJs that you worked with on that, or were you mixing it yourself?
I mixed all of them.
All of them?
Yeah, that was
your series?
That was my series, yeah, that was it.
Okay, cool. How did that, I mean, obviously we know that the physical sales impacted the sales of compilations quite drastically, and you look at the space now with streaming and curating. How did that sort of affect the compilations that you were doing? And as we said, the compilations were very much dictating what DJs were relevant at the time.
Yeah.
How did that impact? How did you deal with that change?
So yeah, in the early days it was very much like compilations were almost like your kind of badge of honor, so to speak. If you're doing compilations, that was kind of a big kind of a cosign around you being an established DJ. And then as the market moved on, obviously in those days the compilation market was big, and as obviously the market moved on now, you find that the guys are kind of, they're doing their own podcasts, you can do your own stuff on Mixcloud, so that's really the market.
So there's no licensing involved.
Well, yeah, if you're working on something like Mixcloud, etc., but it has changed the dynamic around. So compilations have definitely moved on, and the way they're consumed is very much kind of online through Mixcloud's curated playlists, etc.
How were you breaking records at that time? Because I think part of what I wanted to chat to you about was how you fulfill the function of being an A&R as well as what goes on behind the scenes at record labels. So I didn't know anyway before I got into working at a label how influential a records label's job is in actually breaking songs, in submitting it to radio, to promoting it, as you said, to DJs. Yep. How did you go about breaking that song?
So we'd get the records in. I'd go to international conferences. We'd get a sense of records coming in, or we'd have communication records, that land, and then really about identifying. Obviously, we've got quite a diverse market here. We had the deep house kind of urban market. You had more like the trance market. So it was really about getting the records in those days to the right DJ. So it was very DJ focused because they were specialist records. So it was really about getting like a record to Fresh, or getting a record to to YFM, or getting a record to Derek the Bandit in those days. It was trance because they had the main shows, and actually launching them on there. And then obviously also sampling the DJs at clubs was a big kind of move. So we'd bring in like 20-30 samples, and we'd get them to clubs, and that's how we would develop a song. And eventually, if it started getting traction, so on radio and at club level, we would then be able to go and take it to radio. And then those days radio was supporting a lot of dance music, and we'd get into a radio play, and that's how you'd create a hit. And with a few, everything from the whole Meet of the Love Parade, the Todd Terry, Something's Going On, Niels van Gogh, Pulverterm. There were so many that we kind of broke in that space. Probably the biggest one was Robert Mile, Children, right? I remember getting that record in first land. It was like, wow, this is an instrumental piano record. and what am I going to do with it? And again, feeding it into the market, and the thing just kind of, obviously there's a global thing
at those days, because I mean something like that is, at the time, it would have been an underground record.
Very much
because
so.
It wasn't
instrumental piano record.
Was it a case of building the demand and the hype around it in the club scene with the tastemaker DJs, or was it just a sort of broader approach of submitting to everybody and hoping that something stuck?
It was about building it at a club level, and actually, you find, with a record like that, it just the record did the talking, right? When the guys playing, they were having their reaction on the floor. They were like, "Shit, this record is it's just reacting on my floors. People are loving it. They're requesting it. What is this instrumental track?" And obviously, the same thing was happening globally. So there was a whole international global momentum happening on that record, and that's how kind of it built into that. And it was again another big, one of those anomaly records, an instrumental trance record at those days that went on to become a number one on radio.
Yeah. At that time, as you mentioned, Derek the Bandit and guys like, for me anyway, like Roger Good at the time that I was coming into the dance scene, and what I was being exposed to, there were the dance specialist shows like those where they were playing sort of more underground records and breaking songs like that. And radio used to have a lot more influence in what was happening in the clubs, and I feel now the clubs are having a lot more influence on what's actually playing on radio in terms of the dance scene. How do you feel that the scene changed from, because I think there was a point, as we touched on before this interview, where the bubble burst for dance music globally, and then it became very much pop and rock, and then now it's made a resurgence. How did that affect what you were doing in the label?
Yeah, it was interesting. It was around 2000. I mean, the dance music was just everywhere. I still recall, I think 5FM did a broadcast from the morning. It was 2000, from the morning. Like at 5 o'clock, they followed. It's actually Radio 1 that did it, and they just echoed it. But Radio 1 pretty much followed DJs from sunrise in Hawaii, because it was the first sunrise. Oh, sorry, in Australia, and then they had DJs playing pretty much the whole day for 24 hours.
Was this the NY?
This is New Year's Eve, 2000, right? So 2YK, 2YK, and they followed DJs from the morning right through until like I think at midnight, and then obviously they're going country to country as the time zones were crossing over.
I actually think my brother is 9 years older than what I am, and at that time he was 16, 17, and I actually think I remember listening to that broadcast on that night, because it was a spectacle for everybody that lived
everyone
through it.
Was just
I think I remember listening to that.
That's all I remember. That I just tuned in. It was from the morning. They started with Carl Cox. I think he started in Australia, and then they carried on. They had different DJs at Pitong, everyone doing like
different
hours, different countries, and they closed off with Carl Cox again in Hawaii. So he pretty much did his gig in Australia, and he flew back in time to go back in the time zone. So they crossed time zones to do sunset or sunrise in Hawaii, which was like the last New Year's Eve, something along those lines. So that was how big it got in 2000. And then after that, it just burst. It was just, I don't know, there was just so much of it that it just became almost, I wouldn't say a swear word, but there was definitely kind of the bubble burst. And then you just saw the emergence of rock and hip hop, right? So Nickelback, 50 Cent, and dance was still there, but it wasn't as big. But then as you saw, it went back into the underground, and the whole Ibiza thing started happening, IMS, etc. And it was still there, it was still kind of building. And obviously now you see it's kind of whatever it was, 10, 15 years later, it's resurgence.
It looks like it's doing the same thing. If you look at the resurgence of techno and more, and I mean, looking at, if you just take a look at the Beatport Top 100, where it used to be dominated by EDM and bigger commercial trance records, it's now very much dominated by techno and underground house. So I think, because I think we actually have, it might not be a case of the bubble bursting, but we've definitely reached capacity in terms of how it's now segmenting the underground, and the sort of the cooler scene is segmenting from the radio scene, and it's now becoming a more, I look at kids anyway, it's now becoming more an urban hip hop dominated space in terms of the commercial scene. Yeah,
very much so. So I mean, it does. I mean, I suppose it's the cyclic nature of music, right? So it's a genre will be big, and then it just goes underground a bit and comes back again. Look, I don't think that I think dance will always be around in electronic music, because it's the pop music for this generation. If you look at it, the kids are into kind of electronic music, whether it's urban, whether it's house, whether it's trap, whatever it is, it's electronic music based. So I don't think it'll ever pop completely. It'll merge, it'll change, it'll move, but that's the cyclic nature of it. In terms of, you spoke about kind of how it influences what kind of clubs, into radio, there definitely is a correlation. But, with the market changing as it is, the reality is, most guys have access. Back in those days, you never had internet. So now you connect to the world. You can click and you can just do whatever you want. If you want to listen to jungle music, or you want to hit trap, or you want to listen to industrial techno, you can find somewhere that'll just give you that. And that's, I suppose, the kind of how I suppose the market and consumption has changed, that you have access to it, 24/7.
Yeah. What were some of the artists that you worked with in your time at BMG, and then obviously with Sony acquired BMG, if I'm correct in saying?
Correct, yeah, they merged, yeah.
Yeah, and how did that transition from your position there to then working for Sony?
So just in my time, so after the kind of from the dance A&R, I eventually became a head of. So I had multiple roles in my career within the company. So I went from dance A&R, I became head of promo. I was director of RCA, one of the labels. I was marketing director, and now I've done full circle. I'm back to A&R, which is kind of what my passion is really. I suppose so that's kind of in those days when dance, when dance bubble burst and things changed, the market changed. I suppose that's kind of some of the roles that I had within the company, which is good because again I had different experiences, different knowledge. Every role gave me a different outlook, a different responsibility, and it was just kind of growing through those different stages of my career within the company.
And obviously, I mean, there's full teams of people that work on a lot of the artists that come and sign to a major label. As you said, you were doing promo, or you were doing the A&R function. What were some of the artists that you were involved in anyway that you were sort of you take the most pride in, and who you had the pleasure of working with over your career?
Jesus, so many. I've worked with, TKZ, it was TKZ, Just Ginger, Goldfish. Goldfish probably one of my longest standing kind of artists that I've been working with, and that's been...
Were you involved in signing them? Or?
So they'd already signed, so I was involved in actually, once they signed, I was involved in actually I was running PR at the time. So I was doing all the promotion with them. So everything from radio, helping them choose radio singles, radio edits, remixes. So I was very much kind of involved with them on that level. And I mean, that's been a long-standing relationship. It's 20 years odd,
I remember
with the guys.
I think I bought their first album, but it was much more jazz, electronic than it was.
Caught in the Loop.
Yes.
Yes, that was...
It was a very jazzy album.
Yes.
And then when did they decide, was it something that you were involved in the decision to then become more electronic and more dance-focused?
So I was with them. I mean, I think their experience really was around, at the time, they once they signed to BMG at the time, they started kind of evolving, through their gigs. They started evolving, and they started kind of fine-tuning, going from more of a... Remember, the guys are two trained jazz musicians. They're evolving from more of a jazz sound into more electronic. And again, I think the residency in Pasha, etc., that was really about the experience that they kind of started fine-tuning their sound into the electronic music and blending the two. So my journey with them my involvement with them was very much kind of like they did most of their own A&R, but we started bouncing a lot more stuff. So I started getting more involved in not in the A&R, but in the advice. Obviously, they did most of the stuff themselves, but helping them from a strategic perspective. But that's been probably one of the long-standing relationships.
Do you think your background in jazz at all helped your relationship with them, or understand where they were in terms of their mindset and them being classically trained? Or?
I think at the time it was more electronic music based, but I think it might have done some kind of subconsciously it might have definitely helped the connection, because I appreciate jazz so much.
Yeah. And obviously, when did you then start working in the A&R side of things again? How long ago was that?
So, I've been running A&R through my multiple positions within the company. I've been running A&R I've always had an A&R, A&R role, even from a PR perspective or a label perspective, but officially I suppose it's really been throughout my career, but now probably for the last 4 or 5 years, we have been kind of solely focused on kind of A&R for electronic music and for Africa as well. So about signing artists, developing them, and rolling them out.
How did you go about deciding on what artists to sign? What do you look at those artists that influence you to say, I want to work with this artist? And then how do you go about finding a space for them in the scene? Because I think at the moment it's extremely saturated with people who want to be artists, who want to be producers, especially in the dance scene. What would set somebody apart that would make you want to work with them?
So finding artists is really about what they bring to the table. They've got a unique, they've got to be something special. Especially like you said, there's such a saturated market. There's so much. You really got to be able to kind of differentiate something that cuts above the rest. In terms of how we find them, it's again looking for opportunities. So if you find someone you believe in, right? Someone say, okay, well, I can see the potential, and then really kind of saying, okay, I can not only just see the potential in you, but also seeing where the market is. It's always unfortunately you find a lot of talented artists that are really good, but in a very niche space.
Yeah.
So something that kind of as a label, you're looking for opportunity, because at the end of the day it's a business. So you got to make sure that you can capitalize, or you can get I suppose a return on investment, so to speak. So you got to find someone that's got talent and say, yes, I can see a route to market, I can see a market for you, and that's how you start looking at artists. In terms of the dance space, I mean, a lot of guys, especially with technology, you get a lot of kids using Fruity Loops, cracked programs that are coming up. Even the norm scene we were talking about a bit earlier is very much around that. You've got kids that are just downloading cracked programs, and they're starting to develop sounds. And it's about finding someone that's developing something kind of unique, and how you kind of take it and polish it and get it into a market.
Yeah. And I mean, obviously, as you just touched on, there's been this huge wave of bedroom producers coming into the mainstream, and I mean, kids like Martin Garrix are a perfect example of somebody that came from not having to. I mean, I think I was watching a YouTube video where he made animals basically on his laptop. Mm-hmm. Do you look at ever working with just producers, or do you mainly look for artists that have the potential to come out of the bedroom and put them onto a stage? Because I think a lot of people don't realize that a lot of the time you don't actually have that ability to be the star. Mm-hmm. Sometimes a lot of producers just will take a step back and actually just be behind the scenes and work. Do you ever look for just producers or beat makers, let me say, because a lot of people will use that term rather, or do you look for artists that you can invest in?
It's both, really. I mean, I think we're not limited to looking just for one specific. I mean, we've signed quite a lot of kind of up and coming producers, because again, it's about seeing that they have a unique sound, they have a skill around the production, and like I said, then from there you start looking to find artists they can work with, songwriters developing music and songs that can kind of take them to where they need to be, but also help them kind of upskill their talent. So it's not limited just artists, but also producers as well. Obviously, producers, you have to be really good in terms of especially like you said in the market right now. There's just so many. You have to do something really kind of stand out to be able to kind of to stand out really, I suppose, within the market. So, but definitely we look at producers and artists.
Yeah. The thing that you mentioned about the internet becoming so widely accessible to everybody, and as I'm sure everybody who would be watching this knows how that's impacted the music industry as a whole, from how piracy impacted it with the likes of Napster, to how in, I'd say, the last 2 or 3 years where Spotify's blown up to sort of a mass scale, where YouTube's grown to become a music streaming service, not only a video sharing service. How has that impacted your decision in what you're signing? Are you looking to, I mean, obviously it's also again widely known that the budgets that record labels have diminished due to the lack of physical sales, because the amount of money that you're making from a stream or from a digital download is far less than 10, 15 years ago, where you were selling 50 to 100,000 copies of a physical album. You had bigger budgets to invest into artists. How has that challenge, how have you dealt with that challenge of having to be sort of more restricted with what you're spending on artists?
Well, yeah, it's ironically actually, with the move, you have a look what's kind of the outlook for the music industry specifically. Streaming is just another format, right? It's just about kind of moving with kind of a format of how people are consuming music. In the old days there were CD players, and that's how you consume. Now it's really about kind of streaming, plugging into a service, logging into a service and getting access to all your music. So there's a couple of there's a couple of things. The first thing is around kind of the outlook on streaming is, in terms of the music industry, is gonna grow.
Yeah, it's positive.
It's gonna be massive growth. So there definitely is revenue that's coming out of streaming. A lot of it, obviously, again, based on the number of streams. But it has changed the dynamics a little bit. I mean, from an A&R perspective, we definitely look. You look at artists. You can't just come and cold say, "I've got a hit," right? Normally, you have to show some proof, some proof of life. So you've got it out on YouTube, and you've got 10,000 views or whatever it is, more than 10,000. And that you can show you that there's some interest there. So it really for up and coming artists is really about using that platform to create some proof of life. So you've got some momentum coming into looking for a deal. In terms of how it's changed the market, it's funny, the market right now is very much into a single situation now. So one single can generate a lot of money for you. It's not about doing an album. And also the fact that you're online, you can also work in real time. So once you got it out, you can get feedback and say, well, single's not really working. It needs, there's some tweaks. So you're taking that feedback and working that into your next single. So it definitely has changed the dynamics. But again, it's actually a lot more dynamic because you're in a kind of a very fluid space. And streaming definitely has played a big role in terms of how you look at music. Because very much about looking at the numbers and saying, well, especially with platforms like Spotify and Apple, you get a lot of data that tells you how the market is reacting to that song.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the thing about that I really wish more artists realized was that because the internet is so widely accessible and there are all these platforms that are available to people to distribute their music from, a lot of people assume, unfortunately, that they have to go to a label to get their break or to reach people on those platforms, where I believe if you're a new artist coming into the industry, spend a year at least building a presence for yourself online, on, as you said, YouTube, on SoundCloud, on your socials, because a lot of the time you'll then be in a better position to negotiate a deal with a label if, as you said, you have proof of life with what you're doing.
Yep.
A lot of when I was working as an A&R, a lot of the time, the stuff that I was looking at had to have some relevance in the scene already before. Yep. I mean, it's difficult because, as you said, on one hand, there is this positive outlook for the industry, but at the same time, there's a need for content. Especially, I mean, if you look at what the impact that 90% local radio quota had on the SABC, there was this all of a sudden this need for more local content. So you were looking for good content to put out, but not necessarily finding it because you then had to take a chance on a lot more as a label anyway to meet that need. And I think that as an artist, you should really consider how to build a presence for yourself and build. I mean, it's difficult for an A&R to sit and say, okay, well, this is going to work before it's had an opportunity to work. Because at the end of the day, you're basing everything on your opinion. Everything as an A&R, you're basing your decisions on an opinion if you have no metrics to fall back on. Mm-hmm. And there might be, I think I touched on it in one of the videos I put out, is one label might say, okay, this will work, and another label might say it doesn't work. Mm-hmm. It's beneficial for you to then actually go and say, well, I'm going to release this myself, especially if you're doing something more experimental. I mean, if you touched on Gom as a genre, that didn't come from labels. That came from a scene that was built on culture and on people distributing music freely through their various channels, whether it was YouTube or just peer-to-peer sharing from sending it from your phone or sharing CDs. And that then built this whole culture around the music. And now there's interest from labels in signing those kinds of artists. So I think as an artist wanting to get into the industry anyway, if you've never released anything before, spend a year at least experimenting with those platforms and getting your music out there. And if there then is a need for it, I know anyway, if I was working for a label still, I would look at giving a more preferential deal to people that have actually proven that what they're doing works than just some new artist that you're going to take a chance on. Because you don't want to be stuck 5 years down the line with a deal that you signed when you didn't actually have another choice. That was the only choice that you had. And I think that's something that I really think people should realize. And I think yeah.
No, and I agree with you. I mean, it's important that you got it 100% right. The internet is access to the world, and it's rare that you're going to find someone that comes in cold. There has to be nowadays. A&R is a lot about around the stats. So I mean, look at the stats. Where is the heat? So you got a track on SoundCloud that's got 1 million streams. Okay, well, there's something going on there. Where analyzing that data and having a look at where the opportunity is. So it's very much about that, about curating your own momentum, using the platforms that are available, and there's many of them. There's so many. There's actually got to choose where you want to be. So it is very much about artists creating the momentum, developing kind of their sound, knowing who they are, and from there being able to upstream, because most guys find eventually they need to upstream. They can get to a certain level, doing the indie thing or the underground thing, but eventually if you want to get to the next level, that's when you need kind of that resource investment, and that's, I suppose, where label starts coming into play.
Well, I think, as you said, it's about them finding themselves, because there's a lot of artists that I've come into contact with anyway that don't know who they are necessarily when they come out and say, I want to sign to a label. And it sometimes put them in the unfortunate position that when they do sign to that label, there's now this expectation on them. The label's investing money, and as you said, those resources that are meant to accelerate somebody's career, there's now this expectation on them to deliver. And if they have to go through the process of finding themselves, and it's not working out, then you have to then recoup hundreds of thousands of rands that have been invested in PR and in music videos. So you're in a much more favorable position if you've actually gone through that process of finding yourself and finding a niche for yourself. Because I think that's something that would take another hour to discuss, and just how important it is to find your own niche in the space. I think a lot of people assume that when you sign to a major, your responsibility is to appeal to absolutely everybody. But the trouble with that is that a lot of the time, if you're shooting this wide net across everything, you never find. There's this theory by a guy called Kevin Kelly, which is 1,000 true fans, which is that you only really need 1,000 true fans to do whatever you want to do in a creative space, or in trying to sell a product or anything like that. And I think that is so applicable to the music industry, because once you find those 1,000 true fans, it's likely that your relevance will seep out into the mainstream and into the main market, rather than targeting the 5 million people. Rather target those 1,000, and if those people truly love something,
they will help you build it.
They will help you build your brand. And I think that's something that process of discovering yourself and finding, because I mean the thing is that when a label, as you said, it's a business, when they're investing money, they're expecting a return on investment. And a lot of the time, by the time an artist finds themselves, they'll drop that artist if they haven't actually returned on the investment that the label's investing. So I think it's much more beneficial to build a foundation that then, as you said, the label comes and plugs into, and then just completely accelerates. It's almost like you need to light the flame yourself, and then the label puts the sort of propellant on that and takes you
to the next level. That's 100% correct. I mean, I think that's a lot of times the guys make that mistake of saying, well, I've got this great beat, what can I do with it? And they say, well, it's a great beat, but what have you done with it? Where getting a relevance. And I think a lot of guys don't. Some guys work in isolation. Some people work in isolation, where they think, well, I've got a great beat, it's going to be sound, it's just amazing. But then, where does it fit into the space? What's the market? Have you got a following? And I suppose the realization of guys think, okay, actually, I need to develop it myself. And I think that's what comes. You've said it. That's part of the process that the guys need to get to before they actually start looking at kind of approaching a label. Going to make the chance. They're going to stand a much better chance in that space.
Well, I think one of the reasons that I wanted to speak to you specifically about being an A&R is that one thing I really respect about you is, I mean, I see you out a lot in places where the music that you're trying to work with, or the music that you're signing, is being played, and you're very much a part of the industry. And even though you've been in it for so long, you've managed to stay in touch with what's going on around you. How do you go about looking for what to sign or what's relevant? Because you obviously in these places, do you spend a lot of time asking people around you, or is it just based on what you see? How do you go about looking for music, or do you wait for guys to come to you? How do you
it's a mix of the two. I mean, for me, yes, 100%. I'm it's very much in terms of being in the scene. You have to be on the street to see what's happening. You can't kind of just be in an office. And besides the fact that I'm passionate about it, so I'm passionate about the scene. So, it's, going out to live events and to clubs, and you start picking up, the emerging DJ or emerging sound, or an artist. So it is very much about being in there, and it's something I'm passionate about anyway. So I love being out there, immersing in that immersive experience in the scene, and then again, about, like you said, a lot of guys do come to you. So in terms of about finding new music, it's a mixture. It's really, part of it's live, part of it's people kind of coming, submitting to you, and also actually kind of the internet, right? You can go and find stuff that's popping. Looking at different, looking at SoundCloud, looking at all the different platforms, you can find stuff. And so it's really about kind of spreading the net as wide as possible to kind of see, what's and staying relevant around trends, etc.
One of the places that I know you go looking for music, and one of the places that I've run into is ADE, which is the Amsterdam dance event, which I did when I was there last year. I did a couple of videos there just speaking about what it is for people that have heard the name but don't actually know what it's about. Mm-hmm. And I mean, it's just as a quick sort of overview of what it is, it's a 4 sort of day conference. It's throughout a week in October in Amsterdam, and it's basically just every sort of key player in the dance scene or stakeholder in the dance scene in the world, whether it's a promoter, whether it's a label, come there and they network and they discuss ideas, and it's really a way to find out and remain in touch with what's going on in the rest of the world, and see where they are in the dance space without having to solely rely on what's happening on social media or what's working on Spotify in other countries. How do you feel that we measure up in terms of where the dance scene is here versus there? Because I feel, in my opinion anyway, in specifically the white dance scene, we might be behind, but what we've also managed to do is, because we're so segregated and separated from what's going on in Europe and in the States and in other parts of the world, we've actually developed our own culture for certain types of electronic music. As we touched on, Gqom is one of those genres. The bass house scene, which you touched on as well, is one of those genres where, because we're not really interacting with that space, we've built our own subgenres of those things to accommodate for a need in our country anyway, to fulfill that need. So how do you feel we measure up to the dance scene in the rest of the world?
I mean, as a market, we definitely are kind of one of the biggest dance markets, if you think about it, in South Africa, and I suppose throughout Africa, but South Africa specifically, dance music is our national music. A mass market is a 4/4 based beat is our national music, right? That is the core of our national music. So we've got a very big and emerging dance scene. It's interesting you talked about the different markets, and I suppose that one of the unique, and it was more so in the old days, but obviously it's still relevant now, but because we've got the diverse markets, we've got a European influence and big US influence, specifically for the urban market. So that's kind of helped create this kind of different sound, and different sound, but a unique sound. Talking about these little subgenres like Kwaito and Mom, or that are coming through. But it definitely positions us in a very good space. So there's a lot of spotlight right now, specifically on Africa and South Africa as well, because you've got such a unique and a diverse sound. And I think that's, if you look at, the opportunities that are coming through, just right now, there's a big focus around kind of, around what's coming out of Africa, because it's fresh, something different, right? And again, that's born from us being in a bit of an isolated space and taking influences from Europe and from the US and creating these kind of by sound, these kind of our own unique African sounds. In Nigeria, you've got, the Afrobeat sound, which is it's massive. In South Africa, you've got, Ngom, and you've got this kind of deep house sound. Again, we're one of the biggest deep house markets in the world, outside of the US. Because that's the mass market into that kind of the deep house. Instead of the deep house, we're talking about kind of the more soul deep house sound. One of the biggest markets. So there definitely is how we are positioned right now, I think, as a continent is really amazing, just to see how there's so much tension coming into our market, and you're seeing it kind of. I mean,
I think there's a spotlight that's been placed on Africa in general, but I think if I look at, from my perspective anyway, the music that's had the most appeal to bridging that gap between where we are in Africa to the rest of the world has been the stuff, as you said, that's the freshest, that's the most unique, it's not a case of people trying to imitate what's going on in those countries and trying to rip it off as a carbon copy. It's been the artists like Black Coffee and Goldfish as well, Maparisa, WizKid, all those people that have managed to build a presence for themselves out of the country, have stuck to something. It might be influenced by what's going on. I mean, Black Coffee sound now is very influenced by Europe and sort of techno now, but I think it's still fresh. It's still
got a cool Afro sound, African sound, which makes it unique, right? And that's I think the uniqueness that we carry through. You don't want to be another sound alike. You don't want to start sounding like, what do you bring? I think that's the key, to all the artists you mentioned. They've got a uniqueness in terms of taking the unique sound, whether the Afrobeat sound of WizKid or Black Coffee's tribal house, and obviously then merging it into that European sound, but it still keeps the core African, or the core essence of the differential. And I think that's the big moment. That's the big key.
I don't even think I think if you look at the dance space in our country anyway, a lot of the people that have had the most success, not necessarily out of the country, but in the country, have been ones that have developed their own unique sound that isn't trying to copy somebody else. I think specifically in the white dance space, Bass House has made this huge impact and taken over the club scene in the last year to 2 years. And there've just been this ridiculous influx of producers that have come out trying to copy what the Chanda Monkeys and the Carl Watsons have been trying to do, and with no success. I mean, I don't think people realize that once there's somebody that's dominated that space, to knock them off of that position is extremely difficult, because people have already heard it. You have to find something that's unique to yourself and bring something new and fresh to that. You might still be able to take influence from those sounds because it's familiar for those people, but actually have something that is completely new to them, that actually allows you to stand apart from trying to copy something sort of as a carbon copy. So, I mean, what would you say somebody that wants to get into production as an up-and-comer should take into consideration, not necessarily as somebody that wants to sign to Sony, but somebody that, if you were to give them just advice, if they came to you for advice, what would you want them, what's one key element that you would want them to know?
There's one key. I think it's, you touched on quite a few points that I think are very pertinent, but there's quite a few things. I mean, the first thing is a producer, right? I think you should produce something that you're passionate about, right? So don't just try and, if you're in it just for the fame, I just want to be rich and do gigs. Yeah, you can look at that, you can try and go for that, but it should be something that you're passionate about. So if you want to do bass house because you're passionate about it. And then look at the market. So you said about what differentiates you. So you've got, let's just keep bass house as the example. If I want to do bass house tracks, but you've already got these big guys like Kyle, like Chanda, Vimo, and all those guys that are producing stuff. So how do you differentiate? So you want to be in that space, sure, but if you start doing the same stuff, you're always going to be secondary. So I think be passionate about what you're producing, because that's always going to give you the best artistic outcome. Secondly is be aware of the market, so having a relevance, understanding on where the market is. If I'm just going to do another sound alike that's not going to be as good, then why are you doing it? Rather, you might start there, but you have to start defining and fine-tuning your sound. So be relevant about being relevant in the market space, and also differentiator. So you need something that's different, something that stands you out. So using that bass house example, okay, it sounds like Carl, but actually it's a little bit different. What is it? And that's the thing. That's some of the stuff to think about when you're actually heading into production. And then we spoke about it earlier about being able to actually develop a scene. So don't just come and say, I've got this great bass house track, sign it. You're going to say, well, I've tested it out. I've put it on SoundCloud. I've got some momentum on it already.
Okay. And the last thing that I just wanted to touch on was, I think there's something that's really pertinent to what we've been discussing, which is how people who want, there's obviously a demand for labels still in this country to help people, to give them advice, to advise them, to sort of, as we said, propel their careers further. So there are still artists that want to sign to a label. How should they go about signing? What should they consider when deciding what label to go with? How should they go about approaching an A&R, and what should they really take into consideration when doing that? Because as we said, one of the things is to build an audience for yourself before, but I'm sure there's a lot of other things that people should consider when approaching somebody like you, saying, I want to be signed to Sony.
I think we've covered a lot of it in our conversation today. I think, it's about, again, when you're approaching, finding out kind of what you're doing, getting some momentum. So you've got some momentum, trying stuff out. So whether you've got some heat on SoundCloud or YouTube, whatever, understanding the market. So relevance is important, right? So being aware. A lot of the guys come in, they're just not aware. They're like, I've got a good song, take it to radio. But just having an awareness about the market. Where's the market at? Where's the audience? So if yes, you got a great breakbeat track, but where's breakbeat right now? Is it viable? Yes, it's not a niche, but then is it worthwhile going to label with it? So it's about really kind of understanding what you're pitching. You spoke about knowing who you are, knowing what you're doing. So knowing, okay, this is what I am. I'm doing this kind of genre. I know where my market is. I understand it. I've tried it. I've already got some momentum. So it's about getting all those into place. So having a real good perspective around what you're pitching before you go to a label, as opposed to just coming in, the whole naive. Oh, I've just developed this great track. Can you sign it? So I think that's I suppose one of the biggest kind of takeaways is just having, and that the reality is you don't need someone to show you. You can research that. It's easy. You can just Google it, and you can find out. Or listen to radio. If you want to be in the urban house space, listen to what's happening on urban radio. What's penetrating the market? Look at the charts, see what's happening, and then compare the stuff that you're doing. Is it kind of relevant? Do you think it can compete with what's happening at the top of that genre at the time? And then if you think the answer is yes, and you've also got a plan, and you've got a couple of things in play, then definitely go and make a play for a label. But if you don't have that insight, and you don't have that knowledge, then don't do it. Rather take the time to develop that and get a better understanding of what you're playing in.
Okay. Well, thanks so much for taking the time out of your day to have this discussion with me. I think there's a lot that people will take away from it, both in terms of getting to know more about you, but also in terms of how the behind-the-scenes label function really works. And I mean, as I said, I think artists are exposed to enough to go, okay, well, this artist is signed to this label, so that label must have been the reason that artist did well. And they assume that the label will be able to get them to where they are. But as we said, that's just fuel to the fire. If you don't have that spark, if you don't have that flame in yourself, the label's not going to be able to do anything with you. Yeah. They really merely a function of getting you to that point. They can't make magic happen for you. They can fulfill a task of growing you exponentially, but you need to have that foundation first.
They could make magic happen. The spark's got to be there already. The flame's got to be there already. And so, but you're 100% right. There definitely is. It's all about yourself and how you develop. It's key. Well, thanks for having me on, man. It's been really good. I hope I shared some light with everybody. And thanks for having me.